Well, hello everyone. How are you doing today? I hope that you survived this winter blast that at least came to our part of the world down here. We had about 9 inches of snow, which has never happened. I don't even, maybe it happened sometime in the past, but certainly hasn't happened since we've lived here. And it's been very cold as well. Of course, for the folks that live up there in Canada, this is like no big deal. It's a walk in the park. But for us, it was quite interesting and different. But it's finally melting off, and the roads were pretty clear yesterday when I ended up having to go to the store. So I was very thankful for that. Well, today we're continuing on with our study in Esther, and it's Esther 2 1 through 18, and it's called Enter the Queen. In our last lesson, we learned about the great 180-day banquet. Wow. Put on by King Xerxes or Ahasuerus. Now, he was a very proud man, and he was eager to show off his power and wealth. But you'll remember that when he wanted to show off his Queen Vashti, like a prize cow or a pig, she objected and refused to come when he summoned her. But that was a great blow to his pride, and he became furious and burned with anger. When he asked his advisors what should be done to Queen Vashti for this disobedience and insult, they actually gave him some wise advice. They pointed out that if Vashti were left unpunished, it would encourage all their wives and the women of the empire to rebel against their husbands. They proposed that the king should give the queen's position to another, so that all the women of the empire would see that they must respect their husbands. So the empire was without a queen and a king without a wife. Let's read Esther 2 1 through 4. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what had been decided regarding her. Then the king's attendants, who served him, said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and may the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of his kingdom, and have them bring every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa, to the harem, into the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who's in charge of the women, and let their cosmetics be given to them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen in place of Vashti." And the suggestion pleased the king, and he did accordingly. So King Xerxes' anger finally subsided, and then he began to remember Vashti. Of course, being the emperor of a great empire, he could have had any woman he wanted at any time. But it seems that he longed for the companionship of a real wife and a queen. Maybe he regretted the decision to banish her from his presence, but he had decreed, and there was no way to reverse a decree of the Medes and the Persians. Remember to Daniel 6, 8, and 12. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document, so it will not be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. Verse 12. Then later they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction that any person who offers a prayer to any god or person besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be thrown into the lion's den? The king replied, "The statement is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked." This verse begins with the word later. So we want to ask, how much later? Is he thinking about Vashti the following month or year? Well, we find out our answer in the Bible and in history. Vashti was banished in the third year of Xerxes' reign. That's according to Esther 1 3. In the third year of the reign, he held a banquet for all his officials and attendants, the army officers of Persia and Media, the nobles and officials of his provinces in his presence. So he didn't have a new queen until the seventh year of his reign. Uh, Esther 2:16. So Esther was taken to the king Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month Tobeth in the 11th year of his reign. So 4 years had passed since Vashti had been banished. So now we want to ask why King Ahasuerus didn't get a new queen during those 4 years. What was it about, and what was he doing from 483 to 479 BC? Well, history books tell us that during that time, this king made an ambitious but disastrous attempt to conquer Greece. He probably realized that Greece was becoming a danger to his empire. We remember from our Daniel studies that the Grecian Empire would conquer the Medo-Persian Empire. So Xerxes tried to conquer Greece first, but he returned home in defeat. Now we see King Ahasuerus returning to his great palace, ashamed and defeated. And there was no queen there to comfort and encourage him. Perhaps for the first time he was lonely and longed for the companionship of a queen. The king's attendants saw the sadness and depression of their master, and they made a proposal of what to do about it. They suggested that a search be made for beautiful young virgins. The king deserved only the best. It would be something like a beauty contest. The king's commissioners would bring these beautiful girls to the king's harem at Susa. There they would be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women. There they would receive beauty treatments. From among these beauties, the king would choose the girl that pleased him the most and make her queen in Vashti's place. King Ahasuerus liked this proposal of his attendants and decided to follow it. So let's read on. Esther 2, 5 through 9. There was a Jew at the citadel in Susa whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been taken from Jerusalem with the exiles who had been deported with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had deported. He was the guardian to Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. Now the young woman was beautiful of form and face, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So it came about when the command and the decree of the king were heard, and many young ladies were gathered to the citadel of Susa into the custody of Haggai, that Esther was taken to the king's palace into the custody of Haggai, who was in charge of the women. Now the young lady pleased him and found favor with him. So he quickly provided her with cosmetics and food, gave her 7 choice female attendants from the king's palace, and transferred her and her attendants to the best place in the harem. We can imagine the excitement throughout the empire as girls competed, hoping to be selected as of one of those who might be chosen by the king. They didn't have to be of royal blood, they only had to be the most beautiful. Now Mordecai enters the story. Who was Mordecai? Well, he was a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin who lived in the capital of Susa. Mordecai's great-grandfather Kish had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar at the time that he took King Jehoiakim captive. Says so in 2 Kings 24:15. So he led Jehoiakim into exile to Babylon. Also the king's mother, the king's wives, and his officials, and the leading men of the land he led into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Now, this was the same time that Daniel had been taken captive. We read that in Daniel 1, 3 through 4. Then the king told Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom there was no impairment, who were good looking, suitable for instruction in every kind of expertise, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who was able to serve in the king's court and be ordered. And so he ordered Ashpenaz to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. However, Daniel was taken to Babylon while Mordecai's great grandfather had been taken to Susa. Now, it's interesting how God chose an orphan girl from a displaced family of exiles to serve him in high places. Mordecai had a cousin whom he brought up because she was an orphan. Her name was Hadassah or Esther. Hadassah means fragrance, and Esther means star. She was like a fragrant star in God's hands. She was lovely in form and features, a real beauty. Mordecai had adopted her as his own daughter when her parents died. Esther was endowed by God with beauty, and she had the joy of that gift, but it was not to be used for her indulgence or pride. It seems that Mordecai had raised her right because we don't see any evidence in her of pride or haughtiness. He must have raised her to love the Lord and be humble in her beauty. Following the king's orders, many girls were brought to Susa and put under Haggai's care. The historian Josephus wrote that there were 400 girls gathered for this beauty contest. We don't know who brought Esther in with all the other girls. Maybe Mordecai suggested her, or maybe someone just noticed how lovely she was. However, it was done. It was not known that she was a Jewess. In Esther 2:10, it says Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred because Mordecai had instructed her that she was not to reveal them. Did Mordecai agree with this decision for her to join this beauty contest? Did he see Esther's potential to be an influence in this great empire? We don't know, but it seems that he either initiated this decision or cooperated with it. Esther was taken with many other young women to the king's palace. I'm sure this was a great honor, but it must have seemed strange to the Jewish mindset. God had told the Jews not to intermarry and not to have sex outside of marriage. Esther was going to be asked to sleep with the king and maybe marry him, a pagan. Now, at times I struggled with this, and so I read a lot of literature on it. And I just am going to quote one short phrase out of a site called Got Questions, where he explains why God allowed Esther to sleep with a pagan king. Says this, quote, "Did Esther have a choice of whether or not to sleep with the king? Her choice was likely either submit or die. Even in those troublesome times, though, God was at work. This young woman, left as an orphan, living as a slave, and serving the lust of a king, became the heroine of Israel. Her brave actions saved a nation and led the Jewish people to a new level of influence in Susa. That was God's plan." But as the story continues, we see what God's doing. The Lord's not legalistic. He's above his law and accomplishes his purposes in his way. This doesn't mean that we should disobey God's commands, but there are situations in which God accomplishes his will in ways that may seem unusual to us. Joseph had an Egyptian wife because it was God's will for him to be in Egypt. Moses had a Midianite wife because it was God's will for him to be in Midian, and so on. You know, we can learn something of the character and attitude of Esther in the following verses. We already know that she was lovely in form and feature, but evidently, she was also lovely in character. We can deduce this from the way Haggai responded to her. Of all the many girls under his care, he was pleased with Esther and favored her. I believe she was modest and humble, unlike the other arrogant girls who were proud of their beauty and expected special favors. Haggai chose to immediately provide her with her beauty treatments and special food. Perhaps she requested a simple diet like Daniel, that would be better for her health and wouldn't defile her relationship with God. Maybe the Lord had given her this chance to be selective by bringing her in favor with the one in charge. Haggai also gave her 7 maids and moved her into the best place in the harem. It must have been quite a change for this orphan girl. God had already begun to honor his daughter, one of his chosen people. Let's go on to Esther 2:10 through 14. Esther didn't reveal her people or her kindred because Mordecai had instructed her that she was not to reveal them. And every day Mordecai walked back and forth in front of the courtyard of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now, when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, after the end of her 12 months under the regulations for women, for the days of their beauty treatment were completed as follows: 6 months of oil of myrrh, 6 months of balsam oil, and the cosmetics for women. The young woman would go into the king in this way. Anything that she desired was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would enter, and in the morning she would return to the second harem, to the custody of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. So Esther had not revealed her nationality, a captive Jewess, or her family background, an adoptive orphan. I don't know how she kept it a secret, but Mordecai had forbidden her to tell anyone, and she was obedient to her adoptive father. I imagine that some of these girls made a big deal out of their noble family background, hoping to sway the decision in their favor. I think that Mordecai wanted Esther to be given an even opportunity and not be discriminated against because she came from the family of captive Jews. Mordecai was very solicitous of his adoptive daughter. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem, probably hoping to catch a glimpse of Esther when she came outside. He had to wait a full year before he could find out the outcome of this contest. I'm guessing that as he walked back and forth, he was praying God's blessing and protection on Esther and his family and his people. These girls, Esther included, had to have 12 months of beauty treatments before going to see the king. They had 6 months of oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics. These must have softened and beautified their skin. The routine was that the girl, when she had completed these 12 months, could select what she wanted to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. She would go to the king in the evening and spend the night with him. In the morning, she would be taken to another part of the harem to be with the concubines. It seems that she would end up either as queen or as a concubine of the king. After that, she would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. It all seems very strange to us, but then we have to remember that King Solomon, long before, had had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Since he was a man of God, I think we can be sure that the Lord must have led Mordecai to allow Esther to be put into this situation. Let's read on, Esther 2:15 through 18. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, came to go to the king, she did not request anything except that Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the women, advised. And Esther was finding favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which was the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal turban on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. Then the king held a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his officials and his servants. He also made a holiday for the provinces and gave gifts in proportion to the king's bounty. After a full year of preparation, Esther was taken to King Xerxes in the 10th month of the 7th year of his reign. When it came time for Esther to go to the king, she showed her humility and modesty by not asking for anything special. I'm sure the other girls, when given the chance, as all were, asked for extravagant and costly things. Esther just accepted whatever Haggai gave her or suggested. This shows the kind of training Mordecai had given her and the kind of humble, submissive woman she had become. Notice how Esther won the favor of each person who she came in contact with. First, there were the commissioners who were seeking for beautiful girls. Then there was Haggai, the king's servant, put in charge of the girls in Esther 2:9. Next, she won favor with everyone who saw her. Esther 2:15 says, "Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as a daughter, came to go to the king, she did not request anything except that Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the women, advised. And Esther was finding favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Finally, the most important person favored her, the king. Esther 2:17. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal turban on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. In the midst of all these arrogant, egocentric women, so proud of their beauty, she must have stood out like a rose among thorns. 4 years had passed since Vashti had been banished, and still King Ahasuerus had no queen. I'm sure he had many concubines, but none worthy to be queen. When the king saw Esther and observed her ways, he was more attracted to her than any of the 399 women who had been brought to him. Esther won his favor and approval. So he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. He gave a great banquet for all his nobles and officials, which was called Esther's banquet. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces to celebrate the crowning of his new queen. He distributed gifts with kingly liberality. This was no small work of the Lord. Now everyone in the Medo-Persian Empire knew about Esther, but only Mordecai and Esther knew she was a Jewess. So in conclusion, what's the likelihood that an unknown, displaced person from a despised, conquered race could become queen of the greatest empire on earth? King Ahasuerus didn't know it, but he was like a channel of water in the hand of the Lord that he could turn in any direction. Proverbs 21:1 says the king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he pleases. In his book, Esther, A Woman of Strength and Dignity, Charles Swindoll gives us 3 points to think about. Number one, God's plans are not hindered when the events of the world are carnal or secular. Number two, God's purposes are not frustrated by moral or marital failure. Three, God's people are not exalted from high places because of handicap or hardship. God is at work. He will accomplish what he has planned. Isaiah 55:8-11 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven, and do not return there without watering the earth and making it produce and sprout, and providing seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so will my word be which goes out of my mouth. It will not return to me empty, without accomplishing what I desire, and without succeeding in the purpose for which I sent it." But God wants to use his servants who love him, first of all, and who live out humble and submissive lives, committed to do his will. Think of how the Father used the young, innocent Mary to be the mother of his son. Think of how he chose a faithful carpenter named Joseph to be the guardian and protector of Mary and Jesus. And here in this wonderful story, God chose two nobodies to become queen and prime minister of the greatest empire on earth. You know, God can use us too if we give him first place in our lives. That's the whole deal, isn't it, folks? We need to give him first place. All right, let's see. Let me make it so you guys can unmute yourselves, and let me bring up the gallery. Now I see you all. There you are. Um, it's a pretty amazing story. You know, um, it's amazing what God did. He used, you know, unknown people to accomplish a great purpose, which was, in the end, the rebuilding and return to Jerusalem and Israel. It's amazing what he did through this lady. I mean, I'm sure she didn't realize what was going on and the import of what was about to happen. But she simply obeyed the Lord in humility. She, that's something we need to learn. When the Lord wants us to do something, don't get argumentative about it, just do it. And do it as a humble person serving the Lord. Because the Lord sometimes has plans and goals, future goals that we don't quite understand. I look today at some of the people that he's using in our world. Some of them are not Christians, but they are being used by him to bring about finally his return and shaping the world up to what he wants it to be. This is why we need to be careful not to judge God, because God knows way better than we do. We might look at things going on around the world and think, "Oh man, this is bad. This is it. I don't know what's going to happen now." Well, actually, we do know what's going to happen. We just need to wait for it. Like the Bible says, wait, be strong and wait. Wait upon the Lord. Sometimes that's hard for us to do. We think we know better. You know what? I've learned the hard way. We do not know better. A lot of times we think we do. I have headed down many wrong roads in my life, thinking I knew better than the Lord. And he had to snap me back. Wait a minute, that's not the right way to go. That's not gonna produce anything. When you're walking with the Lord, you are walking his direction, the way he wants you to go. You can be assured that what he wants done is going to be accomplished. His purposes will be accomplished. In fact, they've already been accomplished in the past. He already has said what's going to be accomplished. We just need to just trust him. A lot of people are losing their faith today. They just can't believe that God would allow things to happen that they're happening. Well, you know what? A lot of the things that are happening today have two sources. They're either from sin or from the enemy. But the Lord has a way of turning around things to his purposes, even if they're evil. He can turn he can turn around the plans of the enemy to be a good thing. That's the amazing part. None of us can do that, but I've seen him do that many times where the enemy had a plan and it looked like for sure it was going to work. And the Lord turned it around. And I'm telling you right now, this is why it's so important for us to be praying for one another, because the Lord can turn around things that we don't think can be turned around. He can change things. He can move mountains. It's not us moving the mountains. Yeah, in a sense, we participate with him, but it's him. He's the one who knows. He's the one who makes things happen. When you're walking with him and you're in his will and you're doing what he wants you to do, wow, that's when doors open up. Doors open up. And sometimes you're not even ready for it. It's like, whoa, I don't know if I can handle this. This is a big opening, you know? It's so exciting, you know? That's what makes it exciting to be a Christian. It's much more exciting than a lot of people try to project. Sarah, go ahead.
I just want to point something out. We forget it in our era, but really, it was only in the last 100 years, maybe at the most 150 years, that women on the face of the earth have had a choice in who
Yeah,
they married.
yeah,
Throughout history, cross cultural, throughout all of history, there were no cultures where women